Before we begin, a warning. What you're about to read is not a motivational speech. It's not a collection of feel-good quotes designed to make you smile for 20 minutes before everything goes back to normal. This is a step-by-step battle plan built on neuroscience, behavioral psychology, and the hard-won lessons of people who clawed their way out of the mental quicksand that was pulling them under. If you've ever lain awake at 2 a.m., replaying a conversation from 3 years ago, if you've ever talked yourself out of a dream before, you even started chasing it, if you've ever watched someone less talented, less educated, less qualified than you build the life you wanted, while you stayed stuck, then this book was written specifically for you. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are not cursed. You are running outdated mental software on a brain that was never taught how to upgrade itself. And that changes today. By the time you reach the final page, you won't just understand why your mind works against you. You'll have a complete, tested, systematic method for taking it back. Let's begin. The invisible enemy living inside your head. Right now, while you're reading these words, a war is being fought inside your skull. And most people don't even know it's happening. Every single day, the average person generates somewhere between 60,000 and 80,000 thoughts. Researchers at the National Science Foundation found that roughly 80% of those thoughts are negative, and 95% are exact repeats from the day before. Think about that for a moment. Nearly 4 out of every 5 thoughts your brain produces is working against you, and you're hearing most of the same ones on a loop. This is not a character flaw. This is not a spiritual deficiency. This is a deeply embedded cognitive pattern, and it's quietly destroying more lives than any disease, addiction, or external misfortune ever could. Meet Daniel. He's 34 years old, lives in Austin, Texas, and works as a mid-level project manager at a tech company. By every external measure, Daniel is fine. He has an apartment, a steady income, a group of friends he sees on weekends. But Daniel has a secret that he's never said out loud. He hasn't felt genuinely alive in years. Every morning, Daniel wakes up, and within 60 seconds, the mental commentary starts. You're falling behind. You're not doing enough. That email you sent yesterday came across wrong. Your co-workers think you're average. You should have taken that job offer 2 years ago. You're too old to start over now. Daniel doesn't choose these thoughts. They just appear, fully formed, relentless, completely convincing. And by the time he pours his first cup of coffee, he's already exhausted. Here's what Daniel doesn't know, what most people never discover, is that this internal commentary is not the truth. It is not wisdom. It is not even really his voice. It is the sound of a brain doing exactly what evolution trained it to do, in a world that no longer exists. Overthinking isn't just an annoyance. It is a systematic form of self-sabotage that operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Every time you imagine a conversation going badly before it happens, you are rehearsing failure. Every time you replay a mistake until it feels fresh again, you are deepening a neural groove of inadequacy. Every time you catastrophize a situation that hasn't occurred yet, you are training your nervous system to treat ordinary life as a constant emergency. The cost is staggering. Overthinking has been linked to depression, anxiety disorders, impaired decision-making, chronic procrastination, damaged relationships, and physical health consequences, including elevated cortisol, disrupted sleep, and a weakened immune response. A landmark study published in the Journal of Abnormal Psychology found that people who engage in repetitive negative thinking are significantly more likely to develop clinical depression, regardless of their initial mood or life circumstances. But here's the part that nobody tells you. Overthinking is also addictive. Your brain finds a strange sense of safety in rumination. If you've already imagined the worst possible outcome in elaborate detail, you feel, falsely, like you're prepared for it. If you've already condemned yourself before anyone else can, the rejection feels less shocking. Your brain is not trying to torture you. It genuinely believes it's protecting you. This is the core misunderstanding that keeps millions of intelligent, capable people trapped in mental loops for their entire lives. They think overthinking is a symptom of caring too much, or thinking too deeply, or being too sensitive. In reality, it is a malfunctioning defense system that has turned inward and begun attacking the person it was designed to protect. The spiral works like this. You overthink a situation, which generates anxiety, which reduces your motivation to take action, which produces fewer results, which gives your overthinking brain more evidence that things won't work out, which intensifies the next round of overthinking. Round and round, year after year, the spiral tightens. Most people spend their entire lives in this spiral. They adjust around it, accommodate it, build their whole identity on top of it. They call themselves realists, or analytical types, or natural warriors, never once questioning whether the voice narrating their life is telling them the truth. It is not. Consider what the research actually shows. A landmark study from Yale University followed 1,300 adults over 8 years and found that people who habitually engaged in overthinking, specifically the kind of repetitive, self-focused negative thinking called rumination, were 3 times more likely to develop major depressive disorder than people who did not, regardless of whether they had any prior history of depression. The overthinking came first. The depression followed. Another study, this one from the University of Michigan, found that people in the grip of rumination perform measurably worse on standard cognitive tests, tests of memory, attention, and problem solving, than their baselines when not ruminating. This means that overthinking is not just emotionally painful. It is literally making you less intelligent, less capable, and less effective in the moment you most need to function well. And perhaps most sobering, research from Harvard Medical School found that mind-wandering, particularly mind-wandering toward negative content, was the mental state that people reported being unhappy in more often than any other. Not the difficult tasks, not the challenging conversations, not the moments of genuine struggle. The wandering mind, replaying, projecting, catastrophizing, comparing, that was the source of the deepest ongoing unhappiness. The problem is not your life. For most people, the actual day-to-day reality of their life is substantially better than the mental commentary about it. The problem is the lens through which the life is being experienced, and that lens can be changed. It is not easy. Nothing genuinely transformative is easy. But it is possible, it is learnable, and it has been done by enough people, from enough different starting points, that the path is clearly marked. What you need is not inspiration. You have probably had plenty of that. The podcast that fired you up for 3 days. The quotes that felt revolutionary for an afternoon. The books you bought with genuine intention and never finished. What you need is a system. A reliable, repeatable, neuroscience-backed method for interrupting the patterns that are currently running your life and replacing them with patterns that serve you. That is what this book is. In the chapters ahead, you are going to learn exactly how to prove that the voice in your head is lying to you, and more importantly, exactly how to stop obeying it. Why your brain is wired to work against you. Before you can rewire your brain, you need to understand why it's wired the way it is. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Your brain is not optimized for happiness. It is not optimized for success, fulfillment, or peace of mind. Your brain is optimized for one thing and one thing only: survival. And the version of survival it was designed for looks nothing like the world you're living in today. Our ancestors lived in genuinely dangerous environments. Predators, competing tribes, unpredictable weather, scarcity of food. In that world, the brains that survived were not the optimistic ones. They were the paranoid ones. The brains that assumed every shadow was a threat, every unfamiliar face was an enemy, every moment of ease was the calm before the storm. Those brains kept their owners alive long enough to pass on their genes. Psychologists call this the negativity bias, the brain's tendency to register, process, store, and react to negative information more strongly than positive information. It is not a flaw. In the ancient world, it was a feature. A person who assumed the rustling in the tall grass was a predator and ran, even when it was just the wind, wasted a little energy. A person who assumed it was just the wind and stayed put risked becoming a meal. Natural selection favored the anxious. But here's the problem. Your brain has not received the memo that the environment has changed. You are no longer being hunted through the grasslands of East Africa. But when your boss sends you a terse message asking to talk later, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, fires in the same pattern it would if a predator just appeared in your peripheral vision. When you're about to give a presentation, your body floods with the same stress hormones that prepared your ancestors to fight or flee from physical danger. When you consider asking for a raise, or launching a business, or ending a relationship that isn't working, your brain generates threat responses calibrated for life or death scenarios. This is why telling yourself to just stop worrying or think positive almost never works. You are not fighting a bad habit. You are fighting millions of years of deeply embedded neurological programming. The anxiety is not irrational. From your brain's perspective, it makes perfect sense. It just doesn't match reality. Consider what happens in the mind of someone like Priya, a 29-year-old graphic designer in Chicago who's been sitting on a freelance business idea for 3 years. Every time she thinks seriously about pursuing it, a cascade of questions floods in. What if I can't find clients? What if the market is too competitive? What if I fail publicly and everyone sees? What if I'm not as talented as I think? What if I leave my job and run out of savings? None of these questions are answered with, and therefore here's exactly what I would do. They simply pile on top of each other, a tower of increasingly specific disasters, until taking any action feels irresponsible. What Priya doesn't realize is that her brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is generating an exhaustive threat assessment before she enters new territory. In the ancient world, this cognitive caution could mean the difference between surviving a new environment and dying in it. In the modern world, it is the thing standing between Priya and the life she actually wants. There is another dimension to this problem that most people never consider. The negativity bias does not just affect how you respond to threats. It affects how you remember your entire history. Negative experiences are encoded more deeply and recalled more vividly than positive ones. You remember the presentation that went awkwardly far more clearly than the dozen that went well. You remember the relationship that ended badly more readily than the friendships that have sustained you for decades. You remember your failures with photographic detail and your successes in soft, uncertain focus. This means that your brain's running assessment of your own capability and worth is systematically skewed. It is built on a biased sample that overweights negative evidence and underweights positive evidence. You are literally not seeing yourself accurately. You are seeing a distorted reflection, darker, smaller, more limited than the reality. This is not a minor distortion. It is the foundation on which every overthinking loop is built. The reason the catastrophic stories feel so convincing is that they are populated by real memories, real failures, real embarrassments, real moments of falling short. What the brain omits from the story are the equally real moments of capability, resilience, growth, and success that balance the picture. The overthinking brain is not lying to you exactly. It is showing you selectively edited footage, always the worst cuts, never the highlights. Understanding this changes how you should relate to your own mental commentary. It is not your conscience. It is not your intuition. It is not the voice of wisdom. It is an editor with an agenda, cutting your personal documentary to maximize your perception of threat. And you do not have to believe the edit. The solution is not to wish away the negativity bias. It is too fundamental to your neurology to be wished away. The solution is to understand it so clearly that you can recognize when it's running the show, and consciously choose to override it. Here's the most empowering reframe in this entire book. The most successful people in the world are not less afraid than you. They are not less doubtful, less anxious, or more naturally optimistic. Research on high achievers consistently shows that they experience the same quality and intensity of fearful, doubtful, catastrophic thoughts as everyone else. The difference is not what their brains generate. The difference is what they do with it. They have learned deliberately, systematically through practice, to hear the warning sirens and still move forward, to acknowledge the fear without obeying it, to see the worst-case scenarios clearly and then choose to act anyway. That skill is learnable. It is not a gift. It is not a personality type. It is a trained capacity, and you are going to develop it. The 4 faces of overthinking. Overthinking is not a single monolithic problem. It's a family of related mental patterns, each with its own texture, its own triggers, and its own particular brand of destruction. To dismantle overthinking, you first need to be able to identify exactly which version you're dealing with in any given moment. There are 4 primary patterns. Most overthinkers use all 4, often in rapid sequence. The first is catastrophic projection. This is the mental habit of taking a current situation, no matter how minor, and fast-forwarding it to the most devastating possible conclusion. It is not, "This might not work out." It is, "This won't work out," which will lead to that, which will cause this other thing, which will ultimately result in total ruin. The leaps of logic are seamless. The narrative is deeply convincing, and the conclusion is always catastrophic. Catastrophic projection sounds like this: "If I don't get this promotion, I'll be stuck in this role forever. If I'm stuck in this role forever, I'll never earn what I need. If I never earn what I need, I'll lose my apartment. If I lose my apartment," and so on, spiraling from a single ordinary setback into a vision of complete collapse. The insidious thing about catastrophic projection is that it feels like planning. It disguises itself as preparation. "I'm just being realistic," people tell themselves. They're not. They're running a simulation rigged to produce only one possible outcome. The second pattern is binary judgment. This is the all-or-nothing thinking that collapses the entire spectrum of human experience into 2 extreme poles. You're either a success or a failure. The day was either productive or wasted. The relationship is either perfect or doomed. The decision is either brilliantly correct or catastrophically wrong. Binary judgment makes ordinary life feel like a constant test. You're always on the verge of failing. It eliminates the vast middle ground, where nearly all real growth and real living actually happens. It turns every imperfection into evidence of fundamental inadequacy. And it makes the fear of starting anything enormous, because starting means entering the zone where failure is possible, and failure, made in binary thinking, means everything. Think about how many things you have not started because of binary thinking. The fitness journey you didn't begin because you couldn't commit to a perfect program. The project you didn't launch because you couldn't guarantee it would be excellent before it existed. The relationship you didn't pursue because you couldn't be certain of the outcome. The conversation you didn't have because you couldn't be sure it would resolve perfectly. Binary judgment is perfectionism in its truest and most destructive form. And perfectionism is not, despite what many people believe, a commitment to excellence. It is a strategy for avoiding failure by avoiding completion. If you never finish anything, nothing can be judged as a failure. If you never truly try, you can always tell yourself you might have succeeded if only the conditions had been different. The antidote to binary judgment is the deliberate cultivation of a spectrum view. Before beginning any significant endeavor, consciously map the full range of possible outcomes, from worst to best. Then notice that the vast majority of outcomes you can imagine lie somewhere in the middle, imperfect, partial, mixed, and that those middle outcomes are, in reality, exactly what most real human progress looks like. The third pattern is victimhood looping. This is when your thinking consistently lands on the conclusion that your circumstances are being determined by forces outside your control, and those forces are fundamentally unfair. The economy is rigged. The industry favors certain people over others. The timing was wrong. The right doors were never open for someone like you. Victimhood looping contains real truth. Systemic inequities exist. Circumstances are genuinely unfair for many people. But victimhood thinking takes these real observations and uses them as a ceiling, a justification for staying exactly where you are, because the obstacles are too large and the game too fixed to be worth playing. The damage is not in seeing the obstacles. The damage is in using the obstacles as the final word. Consider the difference between these two people. The first encounters a genuine obstacle, a structural disadvantage, a biased system, an unfair playing field, and asks, given this reality, what is my most effective path forward? Where are the cracks in the wall? Who else has found a way through? What leverage do I have that I haven't fully used? The second encounters the same obstacle and asks, why is this happening to me? How is this fair? Why does everyone else have it easier? Both are in the same situation. Both are responding to the same real external difficulty. But one is searching for options, and one is building a case for why options don't exist. Guess which brain is right. The victimhood loop does not protect you from difficulty. It removes your agency in the face of difficulty, which is the one thing you most need when difficulty arrives. This does not mean minimizing genuine injustice. It means refusing to let genuine injustice determine your ceiling. The fourth pattern is comparative erosion. In the age of social media, this one has become epidemic. Comparative erosion is the habit of measuring your own internal experience, your doubts, your fears, your messy in-progress reality, against the curated external presentation of everyone else's highlight reel. You see someone your age who has built a company. You see an old classmate who appears to be effortlessly thriving. You see the polished, confident version of a person who is, in private, running the exact same loop of self-doubt you are, and you conclude, I am behind. I am less than. I started too late. I am not enough. Comparative erosion doesn't just make you feel bad. It actively derails your efforts by redirecting your mental energy from your own work to an obsessive audit of where you rank relative to everyone around you. It is the ultimate distraction from the only thing that actually matters, what you are doing right now. Here is what makes all four patterns particularly dangerous. They feel rational. They present themselves as careful thinking, clear-eyed assessment, or intelligent caution. But they are not. They are emotional reactions wearing the costume of logic. And here is the good news. Once you can name what's happening, this is catastrophic projection. This is comparative erosion. You have already broken its spell. The simple act of labeling a thought pattern creates psychological distance from it. You stop being inside the thought and start being able to observe it. And observations can be questioned. Inside the overthinking loop, how it actually works. You cannot break out of a trap you don't fully understand. This chapter is your map of the mechanism, the precise anatomy of how an overthinking episode unfolds from beginning to end. Every episode follows the same structural pattern. There is a trigger, then a threat signal, then a story, then a behavioral choice. The entire sequence can happen in under 10 seconds. And the moment it becomes unconscious, it runs on autopilot, generating anxiety, avoidance, and stagnation without your awareness or consent. The trigger is any internal or external stimulus that activates your brain's threat detection system. It might be an email from your manager, a passing comparison on Instagram, a memory that surfaces during a quiet moment, a physical sensation of tiredness or tension. The trigger itself is neutral. It becomes significant only because of what comes next. The threat signal is the amygdala's initial classification of the trigger as something dangerous. This happens before conscious thought. It happens before language. Your nervous system has already begun preparing a response before your prefrontal cortex, the rational, reasoning part of your brain, has processed what's happening. This is why overthinking feels so involuntary. In many ways, it is. The story is where most of the damage happens. Once the threat signal fires, your brain's storytelling function kicks in at full power. It begins weaving a narrative from partial information, past experiences, worst-case scenarios, and unexamined assumptions. The story fills gaps with fear. It extrapolates from single data points to sweeping conclusions. It conjures futures that haven't happened and presents them with the emotional weight of inevitability. The story is extraordinarily persuasive. It uses your memories, your specific fears, your deepest insecurities as raw material. It knows exactly which buttons to press. Take Marcus, 41, a sales director in Atlanta who is preparing for an important board presentation. The trigger is noticing that a slide in his deck looks cluttered. The threat signal fires. Something is wrong. The story begins immediately. If this slide is cluttered, the whole presentation looks amateur. If the presentation looks amateur, the board won't take me seriously. If the board doesn't take me seriously, this deal falls through. If this deal falls through, the quarter is a disaster. If the quarter is a disaster, within 90 seconds of noticing a slightly cluttered slide, Marcus is emotionally experiencing a career crisis. His cortisol is elevated. His focus is scattered. The thing that needed fixing, one slide, is now buried under a landslide of imagined consequences. The behavioral choice is what you do in response to the story. And when the story is a catastrophe, the behavioral choice almost always involves some form of avoidance. Marcus spends 45 minutes redesigning slides that were fine, losing the preparation time he needed for the actual content. Priya from Chapter 2 closes her business notebook and turns on the television. Daniel hits snooze for the third time and decides he'll start working on his goals next week. Every behavioral choice driven by overthinking reinforces the pattern. The more you avoid, the more your brain learns that the threat was real. The more your brain concludes the threat was real, the more intensely it generates threat signals the next time. This is the loop. and it runs in the background of most people's lives like a program no one has ever thought to close. The key insight is this: you can interrupt the loop at any of its 4 stages. You can manage triggers. You can recognize and regulate the threat signal through physiological techniques. You can examine and rewrite the story, and you can consciously choose a different behavioral response. You don't have to be perfect at all 4 simultaneously. Interrupting the loop anywhere breaks its momentum, and every time you break it, you weaken it slightly for next time. Breaking the loop, your 5-step intervention system. Knowing the theory is essential, but when you're in the middle of an overthinking spiral at 11 p.m. on a Sunday night, theory is not enough. You need a specific, repeatable, battle-tested process that works in real time. Here is the 5-step system. Step 1. Catch it. You cannot intervene in a process you're not aware of. The first skill to develop is real-time awareness, the ability to notice, in the moment, that you have entered an overthinking loop. This sounds simple. It is not. Most overthinking episodes are invisible from the inside. You don't notice you're spiraling. You just feel anxious or paralyzed or inexplicably exhausted. The first signal is usually physical: a tightening in the chest, shallow breathing, tension in the jaw or shoulders, a low-grade buzzing restlessness. Your body registers the stress response before your conscious mind does. Learn to use these physical signals as alarms. When you feel them, pause. Ask, what am I thinking right now? Throughout your day, set simple awareness checkpoints. Every time you pick up your phone, pause for 3 seconds and notice your mental state. Every time you move from one task to another, take one breath and check in with your internal commentary. You are building the habit of observation, and observation is the beginning of freedom. Step 2. Name it. Once you've caught the thought pattern, identify it specifically. Is this catastrophic projection, binary judgment, comparative erosion, victimhood looping? Naming the pattern does something surprising. It immediately reduces its emotional charge. When you say to yourself, I'm doing catastrophic projection right now, you have stepped outside the thought and are looking at it. You are the observer, not the observed. The thought is no longer your reality. It is a mental event you are watching. This technique is grounded in a concept psychologists call cognitive diffusion, creating psychological distance from the content of your thoughts by changing your relationship to them. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that notices them. A UCLA study by psychologist Matthew Lieberman found that labeling negative emotions and thoughts with specific language measurably reduced activity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm center, while simultaneously increasing activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for rational thought and emotional regulation. Naming the thought is not just a psychological trick, it is a neurological intervention. You are literally shifting the brain's processing from the reactive emotional system to the rational regulatory system in real time. Practice naming with precision. Don't just say, I'm overthinking. Say, I'm running a catastrophic projection loop about the meeting tomorrow. The more specific the label, the more powerfully it diffuses the thought. Step 3. Challenge it. Now cross-examine the story your brain has constructed. Demand evidence. Treat the thought like a witness you're deposing in court. Precise, rigorous, unimpressed by emotional intensity. Ask, what is the actual evidence for this conclusion? Is this the only possible interpretation of the situation? What would I tell a close friend who brought me this exact thought? What has to be true for this story to be accurate? And how likely is each of those conditions? Most catastrophic thoughts collapse under this level of scrutiny. They are built on assumptions, not facts. They are built on worst-case extrapolations, not probability. When you force them to make their case with evidence, they rarely can. The Socratic method, asking questions that force a belief to justify itself, is one of the most powerful tools in cognitive behavioral therapy, which is currently the most empirically validated psychological treatment for anxiety and overthinking. The reason it works is not mysterious. Overthinking thrives in the dark. It thrives when thoughts are accepted unexamined, when catastrophic conclusions are felt rather than investigated. The moment you turn the light on, the moment you say, "Prove it," the architecture of most overthinking loops becomes visible and shaky. The challenge step does require practice because in the midst of an emotional spiral, generating calm, analytical questions feels almost impossible. This is why you practice the questioning process during low-stakes moments, building the neural pathway for it, so that it becomes accessible even when your nervous system is elevated. Like any skill, availability under pressure depends on how thoroughly it was practiced before the pressure arrived. Step 4. Replace it. After challenging the thought, replace it, not with forced optimism, not with a toxic positivity mantra, but with a more accurate and more useful story. The replacement does not need to be perfectly positive. It needs to be true and actionable. Instead of, "This will never work, try." I don't know yet whether this will work. What I do know is that not trying guarantees it won't. So the most rational choice is to take the next step and gather real information. Instead of, "I'm already behind," try, "My timeline is my own." Every person who has built anything started from where they were, not from where they wish they were. The replacement thought does not need to be beautiful. It needs to give you enough forward movement to take one action. Step 5. Act. This is the most important step. It is also the one most people skip. After challenging and replacing the thought, take one concrete action before the old pattern has a chance to reassert itself. One email, one sentence of work, one phone call, one 5-minute task. The action does not need to be impressive. It needs to be real. Because every time you act in defiance of an overthinking loop, you send a message to your brain that the threat signal was a false alarm. And each time your brain receives that message, the signal weakens slightly. This 5-step process, catch, name, challenge, replace, act, becomes faster with practice. In the beginning, it will feel effortful and mechanical. That is normal. You are building new neural pathways in a brain that has been running the old ones for years or decades. Give it the repetition it needs, and it will change. Rebuilding your brain, the neuroscience of real change. Here is a fact that should change everything for you. Your brain is not fixed. It is not a static structure locked into the patterns of your childhood or your worst year. It is, in the language of neuroscience, plastic, meaning it physically reshapes itself based on how you use it. This is not a metaphor. This is biology. Every thought you think, every habit you practice, every response pattern you repeat is physically encoded in your brain as a network of connected neurons. The more frequently a pattern is activated, the stronger, faster, and more automatic the neural pathway becomes. This is why overthinking feels involuntary after years of practice. The pathways are deep and efficient. Anxiety does not require effort. Avoidance does not require decision. They simply happen. But here's the revolutionary implication. If repetition builds neural pathways, then different repetition builds different neural pathways. You can, through deliberate, consistent practice, literally grow new circuits in your brain while allowing the old ones to atrophy from disuse. Neuroscientists refer to this as Hebbian learning. captured in the shorthand. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Every time you practice catching an overthinking pattern, naming it, challenging it, and taking action anyway, you are reinforcing a new circuit. You are physically building the brain of a person who does not get trapped in mental loops. 3 specific practices accelerate this process. Awareness training. The first practice is developing consistent, non-judgmental observation of your own thinking. Not to criticize the thoughts or force them to change, simply to notice them. This is the foundation of mindfulness, and the evidence behind it is now substantial. Consistent mindfulness practice has been shown to reduce activity in the amygdala, thicken the prefrontal cortex, the brain's rational decision-making center, and reduce the strength of the default mode network, the brain circuit most associated with rumination and overthinking. You do not need to sit cross-legged for an hour a day to get these benefits. You need 2 minutes. Set a timer. Sit quietly. When a thought arises, simply note it, planning, worrying, comparing, and return your attention to your breath. 2 minutes, done consistently every day, builds the observer capacity that is the foundation of everything else in this book. Cognitive rehearsal. The second practice is deliberately rehearsing new thought patterns until they become automatic. Write down your 5 most common overthinking stories, the ones you return to again and again. Then write a more accurate, more useful alternative for each one. Every morning and every evening, spend 5 minutes practicing these alternatives. Not as affirmations to be mindlessly repeated, but as beliefs to be actively considered, felt, and embodied. The emotional component is critical. Your brain learns through emotion. A thought rehearsed with genuine feeling, genuine excitement about a possibility, genuine resolve about a challenge, carves far deeper grooves than a thought rehearsed mechanically. When you practice your new thought patterns, engage with them fully. Imagine what becomes possible when you actually believe them. Action as evidence. The third practice is the most powerful of all. Taking actions that directly contradict your overthinking beliefs. Every time you do something that your overthinking brain insisted was too risky, too difficult, or too likely to fail, and it turns out to be survivable, even rewarding, you deliver empirical evidence to your nervous system that the threat assessment was wrong. Your brain changes not just through thinking differently, but through experiencing different outcomes. If you believe you are bad at public speaking, and you avoid it forever, your brain never gets data that contradicts that belief. But if you speak once, imperfectly, nervously, but visibly surviving, you have begun updating the threat database. Start small. The action does not need to be dramatic. It needs to be real, and it needs to happen today. There is a concept in behavioral psychology called exposure with response prevention. The principle that the most effective way to reduce a fear is to face the feared stimulus while withholding the avoidance behavior. The fear naturally diminishes through repeated exposure that disconfirms the catastrophic prediction. This is why avoidance, however temporarily relieving, is one of the primary mechanisms through which anxiety disorders are maintained and intensified. Every time you avoid a feared situation, you teach your brain that the avoidance was necessary, that without it, something terrible would have happened. Every time you face the situation and survive, you teach your brain the opposite. This does not require heroic leaps. It requires consistent, slightly uncomfortable steps. One conversation you've been avoiding, one application you've been postponing, one opinion you've been withholding, one commitment you've been waffling on. Each small act of courage deposits evidence in the counter archive, the growing body of lived experience that tells your nervous system, I can handle more than I thought. I am more capable than my fears suggest. The world is less dangerous than my brain insists. Over time, this counter-archive becomes the most powerful argument against overthinking that exists. Not a book, not a method, not a mindset technique. Your own lived experience, accumulated day by day, proving the loop wrong. The poison beneath the surface, advanced pattern recognition. By this point, you have the foundational tools, but there is a deeper layer to address. The thought patterns that are most deeply embedded, most cleverly disguised, and most resistant to the basic intervention techniques. These are the thoughts that don't show up as obvious anxiety or visible paralysis. They live in the assumptions you don't know you're making. They hide in the stories you've been telling yourself so long you've forgotten their stories. They operate in the background so consistently that they feel like facts about reality, rather than interpretations of it. Learning to detect and dismantle these deep patterns requires advanced thought awareness, the ability to see not just what you're thinking, but the underlying belief structure that generates the thought. The first deep pattern is chronic anticipatory anxiety. This is the habit of pre-experiencing bad outcomes with full emotional intensity before they have any chance of happening. The person practicing this pattern does not wait for bad news. They emotionally absorb it in advance as a form of inoculation. If I feel the pain of failure now, the reasoning goes, it won't hurt as much when it happens. It will still hurt. And in the meantime, you've experienced the pain of a failure that may never come. The intervention for chronic anticipatory anxiety is present moment anchoring. When you catch yourself emotionally inhabiting a future that hasn't happened, gently return your attention to the present moment with a simple question. What is actually true right now, in this moment, not tomorrow? Not the hypothetical worst-case version of next month. Right now. The second deep pattern is identity-level limiting beliefs. These are not thoughts you have occasionally. These are things you believe you are. I'm not a morning person. I've never been good with money. I'm someone who always self-sabotages. I'm not the type of person who succeeds at things like this. Identity-level beliefs are extraordinarily resistant to ordinary challenge because they are not presented to you as opinions. They are presented as factual descriptions of your nature. They have the texture of biography, not belief. But they are beliefs. And they were formed, usually in childhood or in the aftermath of significant failure, from a very limited sample of evidence that your brain then generalized into permanent conclusions. The tool for dismantling identity-level beliefs is evidence audit. For any limiting identity belief you hold, go looking, with genuine scientific curiosity, for exceptions. Every single exception you find is a crack in the foundation of the belief. Collect enough exceptions and the belief cannot hold. I always give up when things get hard. Counter, when have you not given up? Find it. You will find it. And now you have a data point that contradicts the story. The third deep pattern is social threat hypervigilance. This is the chronic habit of monitoring every social interaction for signs of judgment, rejection, or diminishment. It manifests as replaying conversations for evidence of offense given or taken, second-guessing every text message and email, reading negative intent into neutral facial expressions, and calibrating every public action against the imagined verdict of an audience that is mostly not paying nearly as much attention as your brain insists. The research on this is humbling. People dramatically overestimate how much other people think about them. Psychologists call this the spotlight effect, the illusion that you are under constant, intense observation. The reality is that every other person is also starring in their own show. narrating their own anxious inner monologue, and has very limited bandwidth to assess yours. The antidote to social threat hypervigilance is graduated exposure combined with deliberate attention redirection. Every time you catch yourself monitoring the room for social judgment, redirect your attention outward to what the other person is actually saying, to the actual content of the interaction, to anything external and real. The spiral happens when you turn inward. Turning outward consistently breaks it, building a mind that bends without breaking. You have been learning how to stop overthinking. Now it's time to learn something equally important: how to build the kind of inner resilience that makes overthinking less likely to arise. In the first place, mental resilience is not toughness in the sense of suppression, gritting your teeth and refusing to feel anything. That is not resilience. That is delayed breakdown. Real mental resilience is the capacity to feel the full weight of a difficult experience and return to functional equilibrium without being permanently destabilized. Think of a deeply rooted tree in a storm. It bends, sometimes dramatically. The branches whip, the leaves strip away. The whole structure strains against the wind. But the roots hold. And when the storm passes, the tree straightens again, not broken, perhaps even stronger for having survived. That is the model. Building this kind of resilience requires work in 4 specific areas. Physical foundation. The brain does not operate independently of the body. Your capacity for emotional regulation, rational thinking, and stress tolerance is directly tied to your physical state. Sleep deprivation elevates amygdala reactivity by up to 60%, making you dramatically more prone to threat responses and emotional hijacking. Chronic sedentary behavior is associated with higher rates of anxiety and rumination. Poor nutrition impairs the neurotransmitter balance that underlies mood stability. This is not optional groundwork. It is the literal biological substrate of your capacity to think clearly. Regular cardiovascular exercise, even 20 to 30 minutes 3 times a week, has been shown to reduce symptoms of anxiety and depression as effectively as medication in multiple clinical trials. It does this by regulating cortisol, increasing BDNF, a protein that promotes neural growth, and improving sleep quality. Consider what happens physiologically during an overthinking episode. Cortisol and adrenaline flood the system. Blood flow is directed away from the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for rational thought, perspective, and deliberate decision-making, and toward the survival circuitry. Your reasoning capacity literally decreases. This is why overthinking, despite feeling like thinking, rarely produces useful conclusions. You are experiencing the cognitive equivalent of trying to solve a complex math problem while someone is intermittently screaming fire alarms in the background. Regular exercise directly counters this physiology. It metabolizes the stress hormones that accumulate during mental spirals. It restores prefrontal cortex function. It builds the very brain structures that cognitive control requires. If you are serious about ending overthinking and do not take your physical health seriously, you are fighting with one hand tied behind your back. You cannot build mental resilience on a physically depleted foundation. It's like trying to construct a skyscraper on sand. Emotional vocabulary. Research by neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett shows that people with richer emotional vocabularies, who can distinguish between feeling anxious and feeling apprehensive, between disappointed and deflated, between angry and frustrated, experience less emotional flooding and recover more quickly from difficult states. This is because the brain's emotional processing becomes more precise, allowing more targeted and effective regulation. Expand your emotional vocabulary intentionally. When you feel a difficult emotion, resist the impulse to label it as simply bad or stressed. Get specific. What is the actual texture of this feeling? What precisely are you afraid of? What precisely are you grieving? Specificity reduces intensity and creates the space for response rather than reaction. Adversity reframing. People with high resilience do not experience adversity differently. They interpret it differently. Specifically, they are more likely to find meaning, learning, or growth in difficult experiences, rather than treating them as pure negatives to be survived and left behind. Develop the habit of asking, after any significant setback, what did this teach me that I couldn't have learned any other way? What capacity did this experience develop in me? How is this making me better prepared for what comes next? This is not toxic positivity. You are not required to feel grateful for being in pain. You are simply training your interpretive system to look for the signal in the noise. Social architecture. Human beings are profoundly social creatures. Our nervous systems literally regulate through connection with other nervous systems. Chronic social isolation elevates inflammatory markers in the body, degrades immune function, and is associated with cognitive decline and mental health deterioration at rates comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The relationships in your life are not extras. They are infrastructure. But not all relationships are created equal. Relationships characterized by chronic judgment, competition, or emotional unavailability do not provide the co-regulation that human nervous systems require. They add to the threat load. Be intentional about who you allow into your inner circle. Seek out people who have solved problems you're working on. Seek relationships built on mutual honesty rather than mutual comfort. Find at least one person to whom you can say the unvarnished truth about how you're doing, and who can receive it without flinching. The relentless optimism advantage. There is a profound difference between naive optimism and what I call relentless optimism. Naive optimism is the belief that things will work out because the universe is fundamentally kind. Relentless optimism is the disciplined choice to focus on possibility even when evidence is mixed, to orient toward solutions even when problems feel overwhelming, and to maintain forward momentum even when outcomes are uncertain. Naive optimism is passive. Relentless optimism is an action. It is something you do, repeatedly and deliberately in the face of a brain wired to do the opposite, and the research on its effects is remarkable. Studies on explanatory style, how people explain the events of their lives, consistently show that people who explain setbacks as temporary, specific, and changeable recover faster, perform better, and sustain effort longer than people who explain setbacks as permanent, pervasive, and personal. Psychologist Martin Seligman, who pioneered this field over 4 decades of research, found that explanatory style predicts performance outcomes in domains as diverse as athletics, sales, academic achievement, and even longevity. The good news is that explanatory style is not a fixed personality trait. It is a learned habit of interpretation, and it can be changed. Here are the 5 components of relentless optimism. Locus of control. The foundation of relentless optimism is the belief that your actions meaningfully influence your outcomes. This does not require believing that you control everything. That's delusion, not optimism. It requires believing that what you do matters, that your choices, your effort, your learning, your persistence make a real difference. Psychologist Julian Rotter, who developed the concept of locus of control in the 1950s, showed that people who attribute their outcomes to their own actions, internal locus, consistently outperform people who attribute their outcomes to luck, fate, or external forces, external locus, across virtually every measurable domain of human performance. The research has been replicated so many times across so many cultures and contexts that it has become one of the most robust findings in all of psychology. And here is the most important implication. Locus of control is not a fixed personality trait you're either born with or not. It is a belief that can be deliberately cultivated through practice. Every time you look for the thing you can control in a situation you didn't choose, and then act on it, you are strengthening an internal locus. Every time you take responsibility for a result, even one where external factors played a role, you are reinforcing the neural pathway that says, my actions matter. Strengthen your internal locus of control by consistently asking in any difficult situation, what aspect of this can I influence? What action is available to me right now? Even when circumstances are genuinely unfair or difficult, there is almost always something actionable. Finding it and doing it, however small, reinforces your sense of agency. And agency is the biological opposite of anxiety. You cannot feel both simultaneously. Solution, velocity. Train yourself to spend less time on problems and more time on solutions. Give yourself a 60-second window to fully understand a problem. Then redirect all remaining mental energy toward generating responses. The more solutions you can generate, the less threatening problems feel. Your brain learns, I can handle things. I can figure things out. Failure as data. One of the most powerful cognitive shifts available to you is changing your fundamental relationship with failure. Most people experience failure as evidence about their worth. High performers experience failure as information about their approach. These are radically different interpretations of the same event, and they produce radically different responses. After every significant failure or setback, conduct a brief, structured review. What specifically did not work? What would I change about my approach? What did I learn that I now have permanently? This is not self-criticism. This is the engineering mindset applied to human performance. You are not defective. Your strategy needs updating. Momentum cultivation. Relentless optimism is sustained by progress. Small, real, visible progress. When you feel stuck or discouraged, the single most effective intervention is completing one small, concrete action toward a meaningful goal. Not thinking about it. Not planning it. Doing it. The neurochemical reward of completion, the dopamine hit of a task accomplished, restores forward momentum in ways that no amount of positive thinking can replicate. Celebrate small wins with genuine enthusiasm. Not because the win is large, but because the brain that celebrates small wins becomes a brain that generates more of them. Possibility expansion. Regularly seek out stories of people who have overcome obstacles similar to yours, or who have built something in domains where you want to build. This is not for comparison. This is for proof. Every story of genuine achievement by someone who started from a difficult place is evidence that your own goal is achievable. You're not looking at someone's results with envy. You're looking at their results with scientific interest, gathering data that updates your brain's threat assessment from impossible to difficult but possible. Mental models of the high performers. The gap between average and extraordinary is not talent. Study after study in psychology, sports science, and organizational behavior reaches the same conclusion. The primary differentiator between people who achieve at high levels and people who don't is not inherent ability. It is the mental frameworks they use to interpret reality. Mental models are the invisible operating systems of the mind. They determine what you pay attention to, how you interpret what you see, and what actions naturally follow. Most people inherit their mental models unconsciously from family, culture, media, and early experiences. High performers choose theirs deliberately. Here are 6 mental models that separate exceptional people from everyone else. The growth framework. People operating from a fixed mindset believe their abilities are predetermined, a fixed quantity they were born with. Every challenge is therefore a test they might fail. Every setback evidence of inadequacy. Every difficult skill a sign that they weren't built for it. People operating from a growth mindset believe abilities are developed through effort and learning. Every challenge is an opportunity to grow. Every setback a source of information. Every difficult skill a reminder that they are currently in the learning phase. These 2 frameworks produce entirely different lives when applied consistently. The fixed mindset person becomes expert at protecting the image of their existing abilities. The growth mindset person becomes expert at expanding them. Adopt the growth framework by appending the word "yet" to any limiting self-assessment. I'm not good at managing my time becomes, I'm not good at managing my time yet. The word is small. The shift it produces is enormous. The ownership framework. Average people explain their circumstances primarily through external factors: luck, timing, other people's behavior, systemic forces. Peak performers explain their circumstances primarily through the lens of their own choices and responses. This is not denial of genuine external factors. It is a deliberate choice to focus attention on what is actionable rather than what is not. The ownership framework does not ask who is responsible for this situation. It asks, given this situation, what is the most effective response available to me? The systems framework. Goal-focused thinking produces anxiety because goals are in the future and the future is uncertain. Process-focused thinking produces consistent action because the process is in the present and the present is controllable. High performers understand that excellence is not an event. It is an accumulation of daily behaviors. They design systems, specific, repeatable routines that, when followed consistently, reliably produce the outcomes they want. The goal tells you where you're going. The system gets you there. The leverage framework. Working harder is limited by hours and physical capacity. Working smarter, finding tools, systems, and relationships that multiply your impact per unit of effort, has no such ceiling. High performers are obsessive seekers of leverage. They ask constantly, where can I get disproportionate return for the energy I invest? The long game framework. In any given moment, there are 2 choices: the one that feels better now, and the one that builds something better later. Average people, governed by the anxiety of their immediate emotional state, systematically choose the former. High performers, guided by a clear vision of what they're building, systematically choose the latter. This is not a call to deny yourself pleasure. It is a call to make present decisions from the perspective of your future self. When facing a choice, ask, how will the person I am becoming evaluate this decision? The abundance framework. Scarcity thinking frames success as a limited resource, a competition where other people's gains mean your losses. Abundance thinking frames success as an expandable condition where your growth and others' growth can reinforce each other. Scarcity thinking creates anxiety, jealousy, and zero-sum competition. Abundance thinking creates collaboration, generosity, and genuine curiosity about what others have figured out. Practice abundance thinking by genuinely celebrating the success of people in your field. Study it. Learn from it. Let it inspire you rather than diminish you. The 24-hour mental reset. Sometimes gradual progress is not enough. Sometimes you have been so deep in an overthinking spiral for so long, weeks or months of accumulated mental noise, that you need a complete reset. A deliberate, concentrated intervention that breaks the pattern forcefully and creates a clear starting point for a new trajectory. The 24-hour mental reset is exactly that. It is not magic. It is psychology and neuroscience applied with intensity, and if you commit to it fully, it will produce in one day what often takes weeks of gradual effort. Complete the 6 phases in order. Do not skip any. The sequence matters. Phase 1. Extraction. 2 hours. Get a journal, paper, not digital, and write without censorship everything that has been living in your head. Every fear, every resentment, every doubt, every scenario you've been catastrophizing, every thought you've been ashamed of, everything you're avoiding, and every story you've been telling yourself about why. Do not edit. Do not filter for reasonableness. Simply extract. Get it all out of the recursive loop of your mind and onto the flat surface of the page, where you can see it for what it is. Words, not reality, not truth. Words. When you finish, read what you've written. Identify the 2 or 3 thoughts that appear most frequently or carry the heaviest emotional charge. These are the primary loops. They are the ones you are targeting. Phase 2. Pattern break, 1 hour. Interrupt every pattern in your environment. Take a long, vigorous walk in a direction you don't normally go. Take a cold shower. Do 30 minutes of physical exercise you don't normally do. Clean and rearrange a space in your home. The goal is to create a clean break, to signal to your nervous system and your mind that something genuinely different is happening. During this phase, no phones, no social media, no news, no conversations about problems. Pure physical presence. Phase 3. Counter-evidence collection. 2 hours. Go hunting for evidence that directly contradicts your primary overthinking loops. Look through old messages, emails, accomplishments, positive feedback, photographs of things you've built or experienced. Write down specific instances of your capability, your resilience, your positive impact on others, your successful navigation of difficult situations. You are not doing this to feel artificially good about yourself. You are correcting a cognitive distortion, the selective memory that overthinking produces, which remembers failures vividly and discounts successes completely. Phase 4. Future architecture, 1 hour. Write in vivid present tense detail the life you are building, not wishful thinking, a realistic, compelling, specific vision of what becomes possible if you operate from your best self consistently. How do you spend your mornings? What work are you doing? How do you feel in your body? What relationships are you building? What have you stopped tolerating? Make this vision specific enough that it creates genuine feeling when you read it. The emotional engagement is what makes it useful. Phase 5. System design, 2 hours. Break your vision into the specific daily behaviors that build it, 1 day at a time. What are the 3 to 5 most important things you could do every day that would compound toward that vision? Design them. Schedule them. Identify the obstacles most likely to interfere and design responses to each. Vague plans produce vague results. Specific plans produce specific momentum. Phase 6. First action. 1 hour. Write a personal declaration, 1 page, in your own voice, committing to who you are choosing to become and what you are committing to do. Sign it. Post it where you will see it every morning. Then take 1 real action toward your most important goal before the day ends. Not planning, not preparing to prepare. 1 real, concrete action. The momentum this creates is real, but it fades without daily maintenance. The reset works, but only if you build on it. Advanced psychological tactics for mental warriors. You have developed solid foundational skills. Now it is time to learn what separates the mentally competent from the mentally elite. the advanced psychological tactics that create virtually unshakable inner stability, regardless of external circumstances. Cognitive reframing under fire. Anyone can maintain perspective when life is calm. The skill that changes everything is the ability to deliberately choose your interpretation of an event, even while you are experiencing the full emotional weight of it. This is not suppression. It is active reframing. Before the difficult situations you know are coming, the hard conversation, the high-stakes presentation, the uncertain outcome, prepare your reframes in advance. Write them down. Internalize them. When the situation arrives, your brain does not have to search for perspective under pressure. It already has it loaded. The research on cognitive reframing consistently shows that the same event, the exact same external circumstances, produces dramatically different emotional, behavioral, and even physiological outcomes depending on how it is interpreted. This is not a minor effect. A study published in the journal Emotion found that people who were trained in reframing produced measurably different cortisol responses to identical stressors compared to untrained controls. The biology actually changed based on the interpretation. Your thoughts are not separate from your body's stress response. They are part of the same system. This means that every time you practice a more accurate, more useful interpretation of a difficult situation, you are not just feeling slightly better. You are changing the actual neurochemistry of your stress response. You are reducing the biological damage that unmanaged overthinking produces. The practice is both psychological and physiological. The reframes that work best are not the ones that deny the difficulty of a situation. They are the ones that acknowledge the difficulty while opening a door to agency. Not, "This isn't hard." It may be very hard. But this is hard, and I am capable of navigating hard things. This is hard, and I have a next step I can take. This is hard, and I've been through difficult situations before and come through them. The word "and" is doing tremendous work in those sentences. It refuses the either-or of binary judgment and holds both the difficulty and the capacity simultaneously. Emotional alchemy. Instead of fighting difficult emotions, learn to transform them. The energy that lives in anxiety, properly channeled, becomes preparation. The energy in frustration becomes problem-solving fuel. The energy in fear becomes heightened attention and performance. Emotions are energy. Energy is neutral. It is direction that determines whether it helps or hurts you. When a difficult emotion arises, ask not, "How do I get rid of this?" but, "Where is the most useful place to direct this energy?" Stress inoculation. Voluntarily and regularly expose yourself to small, controlled amounts of discomfort. Cold showers. Difficult conversations you've been postponing. Physical challenges beyond your comfort zone. Situations where rejection or judgment is possible. Each voluntary exposure builds neurological tolerance, what psychologists call distress tolerance, that makes you more resilient when involuntary stress arrives. You cannot build weather resistance by staying indoors. You build it by going outside, in manageable doses until the weather no longer frightens you. Attention architecture. Your brain can only fully process one thing at a time. This means that by strategically directing your attention, you can prevent overthinking from taking root even before it fully forms. Develop a library of attention anchors, specific, absorbing activities or sensory focuses that immediately claim your full cognitive bandwidth. Deep breathing with deliberate counting, complex mental arithmetic, detailed observation of your physical surroundings. When you notice the early signals of an overthinking episode, immediately shift to one of your anchors. Do not try to fight the thought. Simply occupy the bandwidth it would need. Preemptive conditioning. Professional athletes do not wait until they're in the championship game to develop mental skills. They rehearse high-pressure scenarios repeatedly in training so that optimal responses are automatic when the moment arrives. You can do the same. Identify your most common overthinking triggers. Mentally rehearse encountering each one and executing your intervention system with calm, practiced efficiency. The more vividly and specifically you rehearse, the more deeply the neural pathway is carved. The fuel conversion protocol. When other people direct doubt, criticism, or pessimism at you, instead of absorbing it as damage, consciously convert it to fuel. Not anger, fuel. The specific variety of motivation that comes from being underestimated and choosing to let that underestimation become irrelevant through your results. People's doubts about you are data about their imagination. They are not data about your ceiling. Unbreakable. Building lifelong mental resilience. Mental resilience is not a destination you reach. It is a practice you maintain. And maintaining it over a lifetime requires understanding the specific forces that gradually erode it, so you can guard against them consistently. The primary erosion forces are accumulated unprocessed stress, chronic sleep deprivation, prolonged isolation, identity stagnation, and the gradual colonization of your attention by passive consumption. Each of these erodes your mental foundation in subtle, progressive ways that are easy to overlook until significant damage has been done. Accumulated stress, not discharged through movement, connection, or deliberate processing, compresses into chronic anxiety and emotional reactivity. Sleep deprivation degrades exactly the prefrontal cortex capacities, rational thinking, emotional regulation, perspective taking, that resilience depends on. Isolation removes the co-regulation that human nervous systems require. Identity stagnation, the condition of not growing, not learning, not being stretched, creates the low-grade depression of unexpressed potential. And passive consumption fills the mind with other people's stories, other people's anxieties, and other people's definitions of what matters, eroding the clarity of your own. There is one additional erosion force that deserves its own paragraph because it has become the dominant mental health challenge of the current era: the attention economy. The platforms and technologies that now mediate most of our waking hours are engineered deliberately by teams of behavioral scientists and machine learning algorithms to maximize the emotional intensity of your engagement. Outrage, anxiety, envy, and fear drive more clicks, more scrolling, more time on platform than contentment, gratitude, or calm. Your negativity bias is not just your brain's ancient programming. It is actively being fed and amplified by the technological environment you inhabit every day. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is documented in the internal research of the companies themselves. The business model of the attention economy runs on your emotional reactivity. Every hour you spend in passive, reactive consumption is an hour your brain is being trained toward the exact cognitive patterns this book exists to help you dismantle. The antidote to each is intentional. Process stress daily through movement, journaling, conversation, or creative expression. Do not let it accumulate. Protect sleep with the same ferocity you protect any other high-value asset. Invest in relationships that provide genuine connection rather than mere companionship. Commit to continuous growth, learning, creating, contributing, being challenged as a non-negotiable feature of your life. And audit your information diet with ruthless care, limiting passive consumption and replacing it with active learning and real-world engagement. The most resilient people in the world are not people who have encountered less adversity. They are people who have built better systems for processing adversity and returning to equilibrium. Their resilience is not natural. It is constructed. and it can be constructed by anyone who understands the principles and does the work. Staying free, maintaining mental mastery for life. Reaching a new level of mental clarity is one challenge. Maintaining it as life evolves around you, as relationships shift, careers change, losses accumulate, goals expand, is a different and ongoing challenge. The fundamental principle of lifelong mental mastery is this: your mind is a garden, not a monument. It requires daily tending. It cannot be cultivated once and then left alone. The weeds return. The soil depletes. The conditions change. What works today may need to be adapted for tomorrow. Daily mental hygiene is not optional maintenance. It is the fundamental practice. This means a morning routine that deliberately primes your mental state before the world begins making demands on it. It means evening reflection that extracts learning from the day and dissolves the emotional residue before sleep. It means regular, honest check-ins with your actual mental state. Not the state you wish you were in, but the state you're actually in. The morning is where the day is decided. Not in the first meeting, not in the first email, but in the first 20 minutes after you wake up, before your phone, before the news, before the demands of others begin filling the space. Use those 20 minutes deliberately. Review your purpose. Connect to your vision. Set an intention for how you want to think, not just what you want to accomplish. This practice does not need to be elaborate. It needs to be consistent. The evening is where the day is processed. Most people end their day by consuming television, social media, passive entertainment, and fall asleep with their nervous systems still carrying the unprocessed weight of the day's stresses and unresolved emotional content. This residue accumulates. Over weeks and months, it builds into the chronic, low-grade anxiety and cognitive fog that characterizes the mental state of most modern adults. A 5-minute evening reflection practice. What went well today? What challenged me? What I want to do differently tomorrow? Processes the day's events, extracts learning, and allows the nervous system to genuinely complete each day before beginning the next. This is not journaling as a project. It is mental hygiene as a daily habit. Environmental vigilance means regularly auditing the inputs your mind is receiving and ruthlessly eliminating those that contribute to overthinking, comparison, and negativity. The people, the media, the conversations, the physical spaces, all of it affects your mental operating environment. All of it requires conscious management. Periodic stress testing keeps your mental skills sharp and reveals areas that have begun to atrophy. Deliberately place yourself in challenging situations. Seek out difficult feedback. Engage with problems that push the boundary of your current capacities. A mind that is never challenged is a mind that is gradually declining. Regular mental detoxification, extended periods of deliberate stillness, time in nature, disconnection from digital inputs, and deep introspection clears the accumulated noise that daily life generates and restores the clarity and spaciousness that peak mental performance requires. And legacy thinking, the practice of regularly connecting your current efforts to the larger impact you want to have on the people around you and the world beyond you, provides the deepest and most sustainable form of motivation. Personal goals can be achieved and then abandoned, leaving you without forward pull. Legacy goals expand as you grow, providing perpetual direction. Lifelong mental mastery is not about achieving a state of perfect, permanent calm. It is about building a practice so reliable that when the storms come, and they will, you navigate them with skill rather than being swept away. The storms are not the problem. They never were. The only question is whether your roots are deep enough to hold. Your complete transformation roadmap. You now have everything you need, not the hope that things might get better. not the vague intention to work on your mindset, a complete step-by-step neuroscience-backed roadmap for rewiring your brain and ending overthinking permanently. The transformation happens in 4 phases of 30 days each. Complete each phase fully before advancing to the next. The sequence is not arbitrary. Each phase builds the foundation the next one requires. Phase 1. Awareness, days 1 to 30. Your only job in this phase is to see, to observe your thinking with genuine curiosity and without judgment. Set hourly awareness checkpoints. Practice the 2-minute morning observation. Begin a thought log, a simple daily record of your most frequent overthinking patterns, their triggers, and their emotional intensity. Do not try to fix anything yet. Simply see it. Awareness, practiced consistently, will begin producing changes on its own. You will be astonished by how different the mental landscape looks once you are truly watching it. Phase 2. Interruption, days 31 to 60. Now you deploy the 5-step intervention system systematically. Every time you catch an overthinking pattern, you run the full protocol. Catch, name, challenge, replace, act. Keep your thought log, adding a column for the intervention you used and whether it worked. In this phase, you also begin environmental redesign. Audit your information inputs. Adjust your physical spaces. Start having conversations about your goals rather than your worries. Begin building the environmental infrastructure that supports clear thinking. Expect resistance in this phase. Your brain has been running the old patterns for years, and it will not give them up without a fight. You will have days where the overthinking returns with full force, where the spirals feel just as deep and inescapable as they ever did. This is not failure. This is the process. Neurological change is not linear. It has plateaus and regressions and moments of apparent backsliding that are actually the brain reorganizing itself. The measure of progress in this phase is not that overthinking disappears. The measure is that the episodes become slightly shorter, that you catch them slightly earlier, that the recovery time improves. These are the real signals of neural rewiring in progress. Track them, note them, celebrate them. They matter enormously even when they feel small. Phase 3. Installation, days 61 to 90. The focus shifts from stopping the old patterns to building the new ones. Daily cognitive rehearsal of your chosen mental models. Consistent morning practices. Deliberate exposure to situations that build resilience. Visualization of your future vision, practiced with genuine emotional engagement. In this phase, your primary work is generating evidence, taking actions that directly contradict your limiting beliefs, accumulating experiences that prove your new story is more accurate than the old one. The brain changes through experience, and you are engineering the experiences that will change it. Phase 4. Integration, days 91 to 120. You are no longer managing overthinking. You are living from a different mental operating system. The work of this phase is embedding the new patterns so deeply that they become your new default, and developing the emergency protocols and lifelong maintenance practices that ensure they stay that way. Design your personal mental performance system, your daily practices, your weekly reviews, your monthly recalibrations. Identify your most common relapse triggers and design specific responses to each. Begin looking for opportunities to share what you've learned with others, because teaching is the deepest form of mastery. By the end of this phase, you will notice something subtle and profound. The internal commentary that once ran constantly in the background has quieted. Not silenced, the brain will always produce thoughts, and some of them will always be uncomfortable, but the volume is different. The urgency is different. The thoughts no longer carry the same gravitational pull. They arise, and you see them for what they are. mental weather, not commands, not truth, just weather. And you will have developed the most important skill available to a human being in the modern world, the capacity to observe your own mind without being enslaved by it. After 120 days, you will not be a different person. You will be a more fully expressed version of the person you have always been, before the overthinking started drowning them out. The choice in front of you right now is simple. You can close this book, feel briefly inspired, and return to the exact mental patterns you had before you opened it. Many people will. The patterns are familiar. Familiar is comfortable, even when it's painful. Or you can decide, not that you will try, but that you will begin. Today, with the next action available to you, one email, one conversation, one page in a journal, one step outside your comfort zone. Your mind is not your enemy. It is an extraordinary instrument that has been running the wrong program. You now know how to write a better one. The transformation is not coming. It is here, waiting for you to claim it. Begin. The inner critic, where it came from and how to fire it. There is a voice in your head that is not your voice. You have been carrying it so long, and it has spoken in such a close approximation of your own tone that you have assumed it was you. It is not. The inner critic, the relentless commentator who notes every mistake, anticipates every failure, and maintains a running audit of every way you are falling short, was not born with you. It was assembled over years of experience, most of it occurring long before you had the cognitive capacity to evaluate or reject it. Developmental psychologists have documented how the inner critic forms when we are young and deeply dependent on the approval of our caregivers and the social groups we belong to. Our brains are extraordinarily sensitive to signals of inadequacy or rejection. Every critical word, every disappointed look, every moment of being told we did something wrong gets encoded with emotional intensity. The brain, in its effort to help us avoid future rejection, creates an internal monitor, a voice that anticipates and echoes the criticism of others so that we can preemptively correct ourselves. In theory, this is adaptive. A child who internalizes correction and adjusts behavior accordingly is more likely to maintain the social connections they need to survive. In practice, the monitor is calibrated in the highly charged emotional environment of childhood, where adult authority felt absolute, where a parent's disapproval could feel catastrophic, where the opinions of peers felt like matters of life and death. And the monitor never fully recalibrates for adult reality. This is why your inner critic often sounds like a combination of the most critical voices from your childhood: a demanding parent, a dismissive teacher, a group of peers who made you feel insufficient. And this is why it is almost always harsher, more absolute, and less fair than any external critic would actually be. Understanding the origin of your inner critic is not about assigning blame. It is about gaining perspective. The voice was trying to protect you. It was doing what a child's brain does, building the best survival strategy it could with the information available. But you are no longer a child, and you no longer need the protection it offers. What you need now is the freedom to attempt things, fail at some of them, learn, and continue, which is precisely what the inner critic prevents. The first step in transforming your relationship with the inner critic is the most basic. Recognize it as a voice, not a verdict. Every time it speaks, you're going to embarrass yourself. Who do you think you are? You should have known better. You can note it with the same cognitive diffusion technique from earlier. I notice I'm hearing the critical voice right now. Not, I am embarrassed. Not, I am inadequate. I am hearing a voice that says these things. The voice is not reality. It is a mental event. The second step is to offer the inner critic a response that is neither agreement nor battle. Arguing with the inner critic strengthens it. Every argument is a confirmation that it deserves engagement. Suppressing it causes pressure buildup. The most effective response is a kind but firm acknowledgement followed by a redirect. I hear you. You're concerned about how this will go. Thank you for trying to protect me. I'm going to do it anyway. This response does something subtle and important. It does not treat the inner critic as an enemy. It treats it as a frightened, outdated version of yourself, one that deserves compassion, but not obedience. The third step is to cultivate what psychologists call a self-compassion practice. The deliberate extension of the same care and understanding to yourself that you would naturally offer a close friend in the same situation. Research by Dr. Kristen Neff at the University of Texas found that self-compassion, which she defines as 3 components: self-kindness, common humanity, recognizing that suffering and failure are universal human experiences, and mindfulness, was more strongly correlated with emotional resilience, reduced anxiety, and increased motivation than self-esteem. This finding surprised many researchers because the conventional wisdom was that high self-esteem would be the protective factor. But self-esteem is contingent. It depends on performing well, being approved of, comparing favorably. Self-compassion is unconditional. It is available regardless of how you performed, regardless of what others think, regardless of whether you met your own standards. When the inner critic rises and begins cataloging your failures, try this. Ask yourself what you would say to a close friend who came to you with the exact situation you're facing. How would you speak to someone you love who is struggling with what you're struggling with? Give yourself that response, out loud if needed. In writing, if that's easier, the simple act of extending care inward rather than judgment begins to quiet the critic in a way that fighting it never can. You will not silence the inner critic permanently. It is too deeply embedded, but you can change its role. Instead of being the CEO of your mental life, dictating whether you attempt things and whether you feel worthy, it becomes a minor voice in the background, one of many inputs, none of them definitive, all of them subject to your conscious review and decision. And gradually, as you continue to act in spite of it, as you continue to gather evidence that contradicts it, as you continue to speak to yourself with the kindness you deserve, the volume decreases, not because you destroyed it, because you outgrew it. The power of deliberately directed attention. If there is one meta skill that underlies every technique in this book, the skill that makes all other skills possible, it is this: the deliberate direction of attention. Your brain has roughly 11 million bits of sensory information arriving every second. Your conscious mind can process approximately 40 to 50 bits of that. In other words, your conscious experience of reality is already an extraordinarily selective edit, a tiny sliver of available information that has been filtered, amplified, diminished, and assembled by processes you are not aware of and did not consciously choose. The question is not whether your brain is selecting what to focus on. It is doing that constantly, automatically, and without your permission. The question is who, or what, is directing the selection. For most people, the selection is being directed by the negativity bias, by the inner critic, by the dopamine-optimized algorithms of the attention economy, and by the unexamined assumptions of their existing mental models. In other words, the most important editorial function in their lives is being outsourced to systems that do not have their best interests at heart. Taking conscious control of your attention is not about forcing yourself to ignore what's real or difficult. It is about choosing, deliberately what you spend your most precious resource, focused conscious awareness, on. Because what you attend to grows. What you attend to becomes more vivid, more emotionally charged, more central to your experience of reality. Attend to threats, and your world becomes threatening. Attend to deficits, and your life feels lacking. Attend to possibilities, and your mind begins generating them. There are 3 practices that build deliberate attentional control. Intentional morning focus. The first 20 to 30 minutes after waking are a neurologically distinctive window. Your brain is in a transitional state between sleep and full waking consciousness, a state that neuroscientists call hypnopompic, in which it is unusually receptive to the mental patterns you deliberately introduce. The thoughts, images, and emotional states you practice in this window have a disproportionate influence on the neural tone of the rest of the day. This is why people who begin the morning with news, social media, or anxious planning often find that the emotional coloring of their day carries that early anxiety throughout. Use the first 20 minutes to deliberately prime the state you want to inhabit. Review your values. Briefly visualize the most important work you want to accomplish. Identify one thing you genuinely feel grateful for, and sit with the feeling of it, not just the thought of it. Set a single intention for how you want to think, not just what you want to do. These practices are not magic. They are attentional training, and attentional training compounds in exactly the way financial investment does. Attention redirection drills. Throughout your day, notice where your attention naturally drifts during transitions, waiting periods, or moments of low external demand. For most people, it drifts toward the same familiar grooves, replaying past conversations, anticipating future problems, auditing current deficiencies. These grooves are not inevitable. They are habits. Practice redirecting attention during these moments, not toward forced positive content, but toward something real and present. Your physical environment, what you can see, hear, feel right now. The task in front of you, what specifically is required in this next 5 minutes. Your breath, the actual sensation of it. The more you practice redirecting attention to the present and the concrete, the weaker the pull of the ruminative grooves becomes. Not because you've destroyed them, but because you've created competing pathways that are increasingly well-traveled. Values-based attention architecture. The most sustainable form of attentional direction is built on a clear sense of your own values, what genuinely matters to you, what kind of person you are committed to being, what contributions you are here to make. When you are clear about these things, you have a consistent internal compass for directing attention. You can ask, in any moment, is what I'm focusing on right now moving me toward what I value, or away from it, and then make the adjustment? This values-based question is more robust than any specific technique because it works across contexts, adapts to changing circumstances, and draws its motivational power from your own deepest commitments rather than an external rule or instruction. It is the difference between a GPS system that gives you specific turn-by-turn directions, which fails the moment you take an unexpected detour, and a compass that always shows you true north, allowing you to navigate any terrain from any starting point. Know your true north. Consult it often. Let it guide where you place the most precious thing you own, your attention. This is not the end. You have come a long way, not in distance, but in understanding. And understanding is always the precursor to transformation. You now know that your overthinking is not a character flaw. It is an ancient survival mechanism operating in a modern world it was never designed for. You know the specific patterns through which it operates, the catastrophic projections, the binary judgments, the victimhood loops, the comparative erosions, and you know how to name them, challenge them, and refuse to be governed by them. You know that your brain is plastic, not fixed, that the patterns of thought you practice become the defaults of your mind, that every repetition of a new, more accurate, more useful thought is a literal act of neural construction, building the mental architecture of a different, freer life. You have a 5-step intervention system that works in real time, a 24-hour reset protocol for the moments when gradual progress isn't enough, a 120-day transformation roadmap that turns everything you've learned into lived change, advanced psychological tactics that make you virtually immune to the most common triggers of overthinking and self-sabotage. What you do with this is entirely up to you. The book is finished. The work is just beginning. And the only question that has ever mattered, the one that separates the people who change from the people who don't, is whether you will begin before the momentum fades. You will feel doubt. That's normal. Begin anyway. You will have days when it doesn't work. That's expected. Begin again. You will encounter the familiar pull of old patterns. They are strong. You are stronger, not because you were born that way, but because you are choosing right now to become that way. Begin. The version of you that thinks clearly, acts boldly, and lives without the constant weight of mental noise is not a fantasy. It is not reserved for other people with better circumstances or different neurological wiring. It is the version of you that has always existed beneath the overthinking, waiting with extraordinary patience for you to decide it was time to show up. That time is now.